Okay, so hi everybody, welcome back. And I today we have a question here. I was thinking about having Sean read this. Sean's going to be sitting with me where that question is right now. And Sean has been friendly enough to agree to come over and rephrase it and think it through with me and actually see if we can unpack maybe even some other stuff related to the thoughts behind this question. So I'm just going to read this before Sean shows up. And then Sean's going to be here, and we won't probably be reverting back to this question again unless I'm inclined to. So Sean writes, just began reading Ang by Pak. The book speaks of Delacroix's first drawing being a self-portrait. I remembered my first drawing being a copy of a comic book character. I didn't draw from life until after high school, didn't touch charcoal or oil paints till my mid-20s. It seems there was a higher respect for artwork and artists back then. I suppose it's partially due to what has happened culturally and economically, but also how technology has changed the living experience. Watching movies, looking at screens, abundance of content, social media, music, etc. And then perhaps the way to bring to bringing respect back to this craft begins with the picture. That's a good question there, Sean. It begins with the picture maker respecting the craft more deeply. And maybe, and your phrasing there is good, so we might want to go back to that, even if you do want to talk about others. And maybe we can find guidance from simpler times. For example, Ang couldn't listen to headphones while drawing because the technology wasn't available. What would you say are some of the most important ways to respect the craft of picture making? What would you consider to be the greatest hazards to be aware of for the craftsmen of the 21st century? All right, so that's the written question. I don't know if I'll revert to it or not, but I am going to revert to Sean as we speak. So for your sake, Sean, I'm going to let the question sit here so you can be able to refer to it. But I presume, thanks to the brilliance of Mr. Producer, we're talking to each other now.
Yeah.
So welcome, and thank you very much for being willing to be here. And thank you in general for being there, Sean. You've been a blessing to the whole structure
Thank
of
you.
what we're doing these days. And it's nice to have you on again. I think you were on with your face before, for a Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, the critique of the cast.
Yeah,
Yep.
The cast thing. And you were in the background, though, as a Zoom, right?
As a Zoom,
yeah. Yeah, this is my first try, I think, to use somebody right in the studio next to me, and as long as you guys are there, and if you can encourage the other guys to be willing.
Mm-hmm.
Blake was willing, but it worked better the way we did it with Blake in the background. I don't remember why.
Yeah.
I think I was worried about, stuff, and probably didn't know how to. Mr. Producer encouraged me to double this up and widen the screen, and so we get a whole different look today, which is a little different from our. It's even different from our the live stream, but it's fun to be here.
Yeah.
So the last thing you told me, having read this question, everybody, is, well, I wrote that question, but it's not what I meant. I think you said that. Would that be my summary?
To some degree, yeah. It's
so why don't you throw it at us? Yeah.
Well, there's just a lot of sentences I noticed that I put in there where it's like the tip of the iceberg of this bigger idea that eliminates a lot of context.
Right.
But like this one line, it seems there was a higher respect for artwork and artists back then. I guess what that kind of makes me think about is like, people have the people who aren't into this picture making, just people who just enjoy pictures to whatever degree they do. Yeah. Everybody has this idea of what an artist is. Like I remember I spoke to a friend and I was explaining something of what I did, and he's like, "Wow, I thought you were just in a room dancing and smoking cigarettes, painting for a couple hours," And I'm like, "No, that's
you mean you're talking about the study portion of this, trying to become a good painter."
Yeah, and just making, exactly, yeah. And I'm like, no, that's quite not it at all, Yeah. So it made me think, people have this idea of what making artwork is, and I think whatever contributes to that image, it's pretty far off it, but it also is maybe indicative of the culture.
Excuse me just a second. I have to adjust your sound. I find that you're actually
too loud,
popping a little bit, and it's not a problem. Definitely not a problem. But I'm going to look silly for a second, folks. Sorry. All right, go back to it. We'll see where we are. Whitaker, I know, has warned me that when the sound is actually hitting that other color,
Yeah.
he may be having a problem with it. So
I get a little excited
Distortion.
when I start to talk.
Yeah,
a little
I
passionate.
hope so. I hope so. Yeah, that means you're in the right field. I think.
Yeah,
At least mentally.
Yeah.
So, oh, there it is. Your laugh really does it. Really pops it out there. Yeah. Yeah, you have quite a wide range. I'm sitting here looking at a screen that Mr. Producer has provided for me, and I'm sitting here looking. My voice is so monotonous; it stays in sort of this range, and yours is going this way.
Wow.
Of course, I have this mic right above you, which I probably maybe should raise a little bit.
20 minutes later.
Just have it a little further away from you, above your head. Isn't this fun for us to be doing this here? Mr. Producer, you're probably thinking, these guys are insane. Yeah, that proves it, right? What was that up there? All right, dead dog. All right, now, laugh.
Sorry.
Go ahead, laugh. Laugh good or whatever.
Haha. Yeah, just
Still a tiny
barely.
bit higher. Yeah, just still a tiny bit higher. I can
Let's
do
see.
that, though, so let's just do it. There we go.
There we go.
That should be better. All right.
All right.
Let's see if that's sane and sober. For me, it doesn't. I'm actually now happy with myself. Sorry, guys. Technology being what it is. Mr. Producer, don't cut this. We're having fun.
Yeah.
All right. So did I lose you completely?
No. I was just saying, like, maybe these ideas that people have of what studying art, the learning process of making paintings. You know, I wonder if people really like those ideas are so influenced by the way our culture respects or reveres art.
Yeah.
You know, and people maybe are really latched on to the things that came out of the abstract, you know, expressionist movements, the action painting, or these sorts of.
Well, and more than that, I think you're dealing with an interpretation for excitement. You know, these days of the media.
Right.
I mean, anything you can do to make people look insane. It gets you the clicks, as you know, in this modern podcast world.
Yeah.
So, it's even gotten worse. So what do we want? That's somebody who's crazy, smoking weed and whatever else, and throwing paint. Oh, that sounds cool. That sounds like something you can get your video around.
Right.
And it goes far away from that whole idea of this thing being a serious craft,
Right.
and a serious form. So that's a big question for us. I keep on trying to nail that to you all, that this whole idea is this form. What is this? Is a form. And does it have validity still? And what is it? So what's it for? Yeah. Anyway, but come back. So your first thing is about drawing. You don't want to be going into that part about the self-portraits and comic books and all that stuff.
Well, no, there was something there. I was reading the Ang book, and it just struck me that Delacroix's first drawing was a self-portrait, and I thought it just made me go back, like, oh well, what was my and not just being doodles and stuff, but where I like sat down with an intention to draw something, and I was like, oh yeah, I was drawing comic books, and then I just thought about it. I was like, it was like, I don't know when Delacroix passed away or whatever, but I'm sure he was like in his prime of painting by the time before I even painted something from life. It's just such a different.
Yeah, people started younger.
Yeah, and it just. The level of experience and to have from your formative years all the way through to your development as an artist to be painting from nature, from life, and things that have real quality substance to them, where I'm painting ideas of other people and they're all kind of deformed comic book stuff or whatever it is. I mean, there's some imagination and things going on there, but
a point you make, there's a point that could be made based on what you're saying, and that is that kids will copy. People say, well, should I copy? Well, haven't you already copied? But it is interesting, intriguing world now, because I have so many people come to me and they have been in the comic book world. And I don't know if the reason is because they want to be comic book guys, or it's because that's what was out there that was in their eye, or even was being fancied by the world, and so somehow celebrated. And but I'm amused by the idea that we will copy. You don't have to ask somebody, should I copy? You're copying anyway. That's how you got there. I remember as a kid, I was with my grandfather on my own for several months in a summer once, and they were very reclusive. reticent. They weren't talkers. Much like my dad, I could see where it came from. And they would, and so I would resort to my room. I was about a 10 or 11-year-old. And right above me, above this little desk they'd provided for me, was a nice print, a hunting print of a dog. And that was the first thing I sat down and seriously copied because there it was in front of me. I don't know why it occurred to me, one way or the other. But you are introduced to that world by some element of copying, and almost inevitably. So, and then of course later on, when you know what you're doing, or if you have questions about what you're doing, and you have more skills in your hand, copying becomes another animal. But thanks for letting me take off on that. And your question wasn't trying to go there.
No, but what you just said made me think about something with myself, which was that because I was painting or drawing comic books, and they were not based, they were, distortions or creations derived from reality, but they weren't of reality. I just immediately gravitated towards, well, why don't I make up my own stuff? Why am I copying someone else's imagination when I have my own?
Wow, right.
And so I started creating my own imaginative drawings of dragons and whatever else I could think of, but I didn't have the skills to do something, but it sent me down a path of prioritizing my ideas, my imagination over the truth or over.
Well, and developmentally, that's problematical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, a big deal. The question between the imaginative and if you want to say the impressionist mind, which is, I've often argued, as you've probably heard on here, that we need to be the impressionist mind. We need to study nature. We need to be able to articulate the world as we see it. I think that's a fundamental thing for even an imaginative painter. But the alternative for a young student kid, though, and what the other people you're seeing around you, maybe you did this too, they'll be sitting there copying photographs. And they'll go to a class where a teacher is having them paint from photographs.
Yeah.
And that's wildly another thing too. And I think my next video, maybe the previous one before this, I talked about the idea of the oh crap! I can't go there. I've lost the piece. I'm a little tired this morning, so for your benefit out there, I lose tangents when I do that, lose connections. But let's keep it there. The question is the photograph giving you enough connection to the art? Because the animated thing is entirely the art, so to speak. And so then people get the idea that the art's the thing. So you have art schools instead of having art training, having training in seeing, you have that focus. Yeah. And that's a big difference. And I think art schools are fundamentally about what you went, and you were in an art school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that was at my junior college that I went to. It was all of the drawing was pretty much through copying photographs, and how good I could get at doing that.
So everything became how to photograph. I noticed that early on. So I have to have more skills with the camera if I actually want to be a representational painter.
Yeah.
It just drives me a little funny.
It is, yeah.
And that is going to be addressed, or was addressed in the previous one. That whole intersection.
Yeah.
Anyway, get us to your main point. So I don't keep you here all day. This is a good, beautiful painting day, and I hate to have you stuck in here in my video space.
So I guess let me just jump ahead. Well, yeah. So I mentioned here about technology and how that's such a big, it's such a big part of life. I grew up with movies and music, and then having all these songs on our iPods or whatever.
Yeah.
And I have the technology. It's part of culture, and then I don't think twice about using it. Until I got to a point working with you where I realized that I could not actually think with music on.
Yeah, right. That's big.
And I had to just eliminate it, and then I started to think in that amount of time I've gotten off social media, and I've significantly reduced the amount of images.
Don't think I'm putting that on him.
Yeah, no.
His training in itself is putting demands on him.
That's right.
Much like me when I was a student, I found that if I was drinking coffee, I couldn't draw a pencil line. I couldn't steady my hand. So I stopped drinking coffee. It's what you do.
Yeah, that's it. You know, it's telling me what I need to do to learn it and what's kind of inhibiting my learning. So those are the decisions I made. But then I started to just think, you know, what are, I guess that's the second
How
question.
many other ways?
Yeah, there's all these hazards to be aware of as a craftsman in the 21st century. You know, like these are all things that I just do and use, and then it's like, oh, you know.
Yeah, well, that you really covered that. I don't disagree with anything you've said. That there's the necessity of, I mean, there are benefits in modern technology, and there are abuses. And I just simply found this, what you found, and that is that silence was the best atmosphere. Now, but you know, if you're sitting there in silence, but it makes you go into your fear zone and you're starting to talk to yourself crazy, you know, and people, you know, who knows where sometimes people's thoughts come from. And I mean, maybe ever, but you can't be in that zone. So people will put on some of that kind of music to take their fears in there, but you got to deal with those things too. So when you're painting and you find yourself getting anxious, notice that, because what is that? You got to deal with it. Don't just turn on a headphone.
Yeah.
You know, find out what it is. If you're anxious about your painting, find out what you can improve in your skill level, or do you have bad disciplines, or is there a really good reason why you ought to be anxious? You know.
Yeah, that's one of the things I recently realized, although it's maybe not quite the same thing, but I noticed I would get hungry very quickly. And then I was like,
poor me, you find yourself standing by the refrigerator. Right?
Yeah, and I kept doing that, and I was like, wait a second, you're not hungry. You're dealing with a situation in your drawing that's challenging you. And so I'm just
and you gotta see that.
I was like, I gotta stop running to the fridge and sit here for a little bit, you know. And
and an aspect of painting, a huge aspect of success is about self-control. And it's all these emotional junk, all the emotional junk is a massive thing. But running from it, I've never found that to be good. Running from it is exactly what you don't want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, this other question is the one that I think that leads to a bigger question, which
Let's
is,
plant it on the board for a second for people to read again. And bye, Sean, for a minute.
Yeah, it's the second.
Sorry, Mr. Producer, to control you like this. I'm not trying. I didn't mean to be that guy, but perhaps the best way of bringing respect back to this craft, which we should talk about the whole idea of bringing respect back to this craft, but begins with the picture maker, respecting the craft more deeply, and it should say respecting the craft more deeply himself, respecting the craft more deeply.
Yes, yeah.
Not just them.
Yeah.
But come to terms with this. You are not this little loser who can't get a real job. Who was I reading about? Oh, Casey. I mean, it was Yogi Berra. He said, "I hated work. That's why I'm in baseball. I hated working."
Yeah,
but,
surprise.
But you know, it really, people think that. People think you're in painting because you just, like in my case, when I was working construction as a little kid, as a young man, I worked every kinds of concrete work and other stuff on the streets and highways even, and other things, and it just didn't suit me. You know, now you could say, yeah, physically it exhausted you all the time, yeah, and I wasn't that guy. But the problem is, it didn't use my brain enough, and I was feeling deprived. So that's but to treat it like it's just an escape.
Well, you know, the funny thing is that is exactly what it was for me when I started painting. You know, because I was pretty good academically. I had, you know, in school and all that stuff, I figured the system.
Memorize.
Yeah, I memorized and did
it.
Stand up, sit down, and whatever. And then
Gatto model.
And you know, and then when it came time to go to college, I did my first semester, and I thought, no, I'm not gonna make it through 4 more years of liberal arts or whatever. And I thought
that kind of work.
Yeah. I was just I was kind of, I knew it wasn't me anymore. But then I thought, because of that pressure, you know, oh, if I'm not in college, I'm going to be pumping gas the rest of my life. Being in New Jersey, they do that there.
They still do. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so I thought, well, I got to stay in college, and so everybody can believe that I got a future ahead of me. And
for all the right reasons.
Yeah. So how am I going to do this? You know, and I thought, well, I've always enjoyed art. It's been fun. So I can actually just do art for fun. And nice and easy. But, you know, little did I know that it's
Would you say the fun has begun? The real fun? I mean, isn't it, as you're getting further into this, aren't you realizing that adult fun is more fun
Oh my gosh.
than the feeling of funness that you get out of the juvenile
Yeah.
interpretation of this? I mean, just when you were young,
Well,
and it was this other idea.
I think all through art school, it was a continuation of that juvenile fun. I hate to say that was my experience though
yeah,
with it,
yeah.
which was just like, how can I create my style, my thing,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
me having fun the way I want to. But
Right.
for me, particularly with the impressionist eye approach, it's so challenging but engaging, and so it's way more fulfilling.
Yeah, fulfilling is there's the key word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, are you living it just focuses you more on the very nature of this thing though as a craft. It does have requisite effort. There's stuff you got to be good at. And resorting to the camera won't solve it any more than resorting to the earphones will resolve your emotional problems.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
But maybe we can find guidance from simpler times. I don't know if you want to go into that, but go where you want to go. This is you now, and this is this is on you. I
Well,
just wanted
yeah,
to restart it on that.
Yeah, it was just a simple thought, like, okay, well, if I want to cultivate a deeper respect for something like this craft, and I don't want to necessarily come at it from this angle of like what I ought not to do or ought to do, but like just to kind of look and see maybe I can look at what was going on at a time when people did respect it more, both the picture makers,
Right.
and the culture that person lived in.
Right.
And you had mentioned this bigger question about what is the form, the nature of this form, and I think that maybe ties itself to the time, the respect for the craft in that time.
Right.
It relates to.
Well, you could argue that that was a stand-in for many things that are more available to us now. I mean, to the point of a storytelling, you have now movies and books. I mean, there's no end to the possibilities that supersede painting by miles. You can't tell a story in the same way. You can make a point about it, a moment, an anecdotal, and even abbreviated from that point of view. Not even an anecdote, a blink. And so that would be a discussion about how you want to have the guy with the sword raised just about to bring it down and not, well, yeah, because you got that blink. Unless you're a comic book artist, and then who knows how much of that is because your orientation is around storytelling. But that's what I'm trying to get at, is to be an adult in this world now is you got to dig in and figure out what the form is. And I try to keep saying that to you all and to our friends online. What is the nature of the form you're in, and what isn't it? What has superseded you? Because being an illustrator is a use of our form, but storytelling with pictures, I don't know that anybody's ever really thought that was much of a thing, except maybe the church who wanted to, when they do the Stations of the Cross or something like that, they might want to, by doing a sequence again, be able to sell the doctrine or the I was going to say heroism, but that's the wrong word for Christ, isn't it? In a funny way, it's a wonderful word for him, but in any case, yeah. So that's right, and that's where it takes you. What would you say are some of the most important ways to respect the craft of picture making? That's my point to you is to understand the dang thing. That's the most important thing you do. So you say, I know what I'm doing, and I'm serious about getting it done. And this is what I have to do, and that means I have to do that. And you begin to find your way through.
Right.
You begin to be the organizer of your own structure based on knowing what you're here for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, something that just popped into my head was kind of interesting. There are all these great works from history that we revere and look to as artists,
Right.
but they were, like Michelangelo, all these commissions for the church that he's doing.
Right.
But his answer to that question, the nature of this form, it's bigger. It's beyond those commissions.
you'll find that this is the nature of most of the guys in the Renaissance that we celebrate. Was well, that gets to that question of the pictorial versus the. Somebody asked me, and by the way, whoever's out there who did this, you mentioned had I read Hammond. I found that I had read Arthur Hammond. He's a photographer, and he talks about some of this kind of stuff. But that cost me my connection. Sean is the best guy at bringing me back, so I refer to him.
Yeah, well, I was talking about Michelangelo and.
Right. That's yeah. And these guys grasping that there was something bigger than all this. So what my sense is they knew where the money was. They knew this thing they had to do. They had to, their form was being used to do something for the church, but they knew what their form was. Now it's limited. If you look at, as we talked about with the Degas video and Ang, it's limited to what it's limited by them, like purposefully limited or limited by what people would argue is. Well, we would say is lack of knowledge. For example, the color light thing that comes along way late with Monet wasn't simply there for them, but they would have evolved into that quickly if they'd seen that. If they'd seen that was if they, to the degree they'd seen it as a factor in being an expert in the form, and being good in their form, that would incorporate that as well. But yeah, there was already a huge presumption, much like what Ang has, that it's all line and form. And then this other thing called composition, but composition for storytelling primarily, and eventually which evolves and begins the whole evolution into what the nature of this form is when you get post Monet and you begin to realize that people probably have always, but must always blur their eyes and see what the dance of the spots is, and begin to realize that. Isn't that more like what we're talking about when you're just listening orally to something, when you're watching the screen? So I'm saying that what we're trying to get at is this idea of what is the nature of this thing? What is it? And Hammond uses the word pictorially to differentiate from representation. And it's a useful word. I struggle with the right word for that. But when we say pictorially, we mean what you're talking about in a sense, the art. So. And somebody else in a video recently, in one of the responses online, I appreciate you doing that. Whoever, I'm sorry for forgetting who you were, but saying that there's the truth, which is representation, and there is beauty, which is your involvement in your response. And that was a very insightful thing for that person to have pointed out. And I'm agreeing with you fully that there is that thing. And I don't think the masters ever let go of that purposeful thing. Like their idea was that the work should in some way flabbergast the viewer. I apologize, Mr. Producer, for this light coming across Sean right now. Maybe nobody can see it. But
I don't think it's, I
was not messing up the screen.
Yeah, I think it's out.
I blocked it as best I could. This is me innovating, guys, just so you know. Without the help of Mr. Producer, I've created this scenario, and I was probably got full of flaws and faults. We did the best we could.
There's this so there's this thing that is kind of hanging in my head, which is like something that we're exploring as picture makers, exploring the nature of this form pictorially, and yet there's the function of the picture in the world.
Yes.
And they're not the same thing necessarily.
No. Good point.
And it's like, so that function changes, a commission for the church, or maybe in like the Northern Renaissance, they started to sell little pictures for people that they could put in their home or something. It just keeps changing over time.
Well, the portrait itself, became the equivalent of a photograph.
Right.
The purpose of it was to remember this guy, so that he'd be forever memorialized in his as the author of this entire legacy or something.
Yeah.
This is what he looked like. And although I like Michelangelo's attitude about it, and somebody said he doesn't look like Lorenzo, and he said, "Who's going to know 30 years from now?" So it shows you he actually had a greater focus than simple representation. He actually had a mission, an expressive mission. So thinking about what that means. But that's an expressive mission more in the nature of, what are we saying about Lorenzo?
Yeah.
And if you give him a deformed little face, you're saying he's a deformed little man instead of recognizing. And I actually think he might have been a deformed. When you look back on history, I wonder how deformed the little man was.
Wow.
But to put him on this big stage, the way he sits, the way everything about the way he sits there is a celebration of something. And Aang does the same thing with the Napoleon thing, trying to make Napoleon into a god. And it was done before that with other kings. They tried to turn them into gods, and painters they were used that way. Really weird stuff. I'm off on a tangent.
No, well,
Pursue your line. Yeah.
yeah. I guess. Well, it's just an interesting thought. I don't know quite if there was a point other than that. I think for like a very linear way of thinking about it, which I can get drawn into, it's like, okay, I'm making paintings for this reason, right. And this reason is so tied to at least this is how I thought for a very long time. Right. It's like this reason is so tied to the function, and the function is, if it's a picture in someone's home,
right,
so that I can support myself doing this, then what can I do to yield the best results of that function? Get the most sales or the most, build my career. But
portraits of puppies and things like that, whatever else it turns out. Yeah. Well, I mean, the issue is a bigger one, right? So you may have to, as a doctor before the era of degrees in doctoring, you might have had to fix dogs' bones, for a while. The injured pet. To get fully into medicine, or even to make a living at it because nobody trusted you yet. You know what I mean? So you could understand something of that sort of thing. But I guess, when you're talking about, I keep referring back to this idea of when you go into medicine, do you want the guy who went into medicine to help people or the guy who went into medicine to get rich? And it isn't exactly the same point, but allow me to make it anyway. And it's because if you go into to get rich, you're not going to be spending all your minutes trying to figure out the very nature of this form.
Yeah.
You're going to be figuring out how to get rich.
Yeah.
So there's a funny little conflict that just comes up out of the blue, not necessarily what you were talking about before.
Yeah.
But it just floats up there, and it floats up there every time. And I go back, and I probably mentioned it before, but there's before Christ was on the scene, so to speak, those famous 3 or 4 years, there was John the Baptist saying he's coming and telling people to start straightening out their lives, create straight paths. And he did that thing. Somebody said, what's it even mean to be a straight, he said, well, when you're a tax collector, it means collect the taxes and no more. Don't get greedy. Don't start taking more money than you get because you can intimidate people. And they'll have to believe you. And so it went on like that about straight paths. Well, if you're trying to be a painter, find out the nature of your form and play it. And the scriptures also have a thing where it also says, I think it's a proverb that says, if you do a thing well, you'll do it before kings. And there's something about that model that you really want to maintain, in your own structure. And it does require faith. I mean, it does require a sense that there is a God, and there is a creator, and there's a destiny, and we have purpose in life and all that sort of stuff. But if your purpose and your love, and it sets up your purpose more than anything else, this love you have of pictures wasn't a love to be lazy. Obviously, at this point, it wasn't. At the time, you just thought love meant have fun.
Right.
And that's the way kids are drawn into their field. I mean, yeah, of course. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Guys, and I think all of us, and then other things go on. It doesn't. Yeah, I'll limit it at that, but. Because I'm sucking into your question now more than you may have been. You said there was something about all this stuff that made you think you wanted to sort of formulate it differently in your mind. Are we getting at that? Or
yeah, I think we have.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's more just cavern, tangents.
Plenty of caverns. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Well, one of the things that a question that just came up to me this whole time, and maybe you were saying it, but this whole time I've been hearing, like, what is the nature of this form? But is this actually, and this is what I'm inclined to start thinking, a personal question of what is the nature of your form? Like this form to me.
Yeah, well, that's the era we're in. What is this form to me? The question is there such a thing as music, and does it have its own intrinsic
Okay.
thing.
Okay. That's
That's the question you have to answer.
yeah.
What it is to you, yeah, you may not be an epic poet. You may be a lyric poet. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
Live there. Be yourself. You don't want to be out there struggling because they say history painting is the thing. When you're Corot, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you sing your tunes?
Yeah.
We celebrate his tunes way more than we celebrate almost any history epic, sort of painting, So there is that thing that's personal to you. But you already know this, obviously. It's self-evident.
Yeah.
I hope that everything I ever say to you guys out there is so self-evident that you wonder why you're even listening to me. But, do you know what I mean? I don't believe in anything else.
Yeah.
But there's a self-evident thing that you have to get through to yourself with. So what is the nature of this form? Even that idea that I'm saying, don't you see that you have to say, is there such a thing that's beyond me and above me and before us all, as it were? And I keep referring back to the mind of God. I mean, where do we get ourselves? Where does this even come from? Even this thinking and the idea of logic, for example, it's built into the universe. But why do we love color? Why do we love color play? Why do we then break it down and say, can I make it do more? And then we start talking music. You start talking in that way. You heard birds, that's very pretty. But then what is it that makes you suddenly do something with it? That's in the very nature of man. I think I keep thinking it's an extension of creation itself.
Yeah, well, that leads me right to that part of the question, which is like taking respecting the craft more deeply. Mm-hmm. And he said for himself, like, my way of looking at color up to a certain point is just very like I've said myself, the way I look at it, it's almost like I took it for granted. Well,
it's not the truth. Degas said it, right? It's not whether you can get the likeness in 6 sittings. It's not whether you can understand painting in 6 sittings. It's whether you sit there for 60.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether you get the life in 60 sittings and you keep the life and it doesn't just become this incredible, overwhelming thing.
Yeah.
I'm putting more on that quote than belongs there at all, but keep going on that. That's a really fascinating.
Yeah, it's the thing that's come up with color, with beauty, with all these things. It's like I just look at it and kind of think that I'm seeing it, and I think that I'm getting it, but then I realize that I'm not really scratching the surface, or I'm not really. It's not that I'm scratching the surface. It's like I'm not actually opening the gates wide enough.
Yeah.
And
digging deep enough is what I like to. We're just boring down.
Yeah.
Layer after layer. Not looking left, not looking right. People laugh when I say that. Some people just think, I'm not going to do that. Because poor me, I'll be locked into something. But the fact is, you're not locked into anything by going deeper. You're actually expanding everything in the entire face of the earth becomes more comprehensible to you by you staying on your, just staying in that one little world. In that one little think it through, work it through, think it out all the way, take it to the nth degree. I really reckon, and it's the nature of man. And I don't know, they say the nature of men more than women. I don't know. I've had that said by a woman to me, and her father and her had agreed about it, that there's something about a guy who he's got this kind of crazy narrowness, but his entire purpose is so essential. But he's got to have it. He's got to have it, like it's got to be a narrowness to the purpose. As a guy, I talked to one of my former students, and I think I wonder if you're still alive today, Henry. An older guy, his life purpose was, Gamble was sort of oriented that way too, was to take care of the family money. You know what I mean? That was entirely his calling. He was dragged into it, made to live that way. And so he would come and play at painting. And he had other things. So he referred to himself as a butterfly. But he said, I can't do that thing you're talking about. But the reason he couldn't is because he already was fully focused on one thing. He was already fully, he was this other person.
Yeah.
And Gamble decided he wasn't going to be that person for his family. And of course, it cost him money. But it's a beautiful model to all of us, to have that in mind, that we want to follow in that way, follow our loves, which are not the love of goofy pleasures and silliness, but the love of something that you sense in your soul has profound value and is worthy of a life. So the whole life goes into it, right? The marathon thing doesn't even begin to cover it. Marathon, yes, 26 miles and how many? 3 or 4 hours, and no, marathon doesn't even cover what we're doing.
Yeah.
The way I think of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's you know, just kind of what you were saying. It's as a kid, I want to do what's fun, like I was mentioning, and then as I go through life and experience things, I'm digging deeper for what that is.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like the same thing.
Yeah,
With
it's
realizing.
the adult version of it. And
Yeah.
yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's anything else on your mind, and then we'll call this a day on this one.
Yeah.
You want to? I'll let you glance at these both again. See if there's any of these you're reminded of anything. I think we covered the territory.
Yeah.
The technology thing, all screens, and don't let it interfere with your actual work and your own thinking.
Yeah. There's just one other thing. You know, like on one level, it's such a blessing in one way to have access to see so many paintings.
Oh man, isn't that an amazing thing? Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's a thing. Like, 200 years ago, if someone's making a painting, and what do? You know, like you wouldn't even know that it was there.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's such a great resource to be able to see any painting, especially with these high resolution images from museums and stuff. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, there's like a trap in looking at all of these images, 1 inch by 2 inches, and the resolution, the way it looks, like my idea of how a painting should look, the surface of the painting is so influenced by the way I see it on these screens. Yeah. And I think it maybe just speaks to the idea of like how important it is to go to museums and see work.
Yeah.
So that I can actually have a better idea.
Yeah, well, that's the thing parents ought to do, with their kids. They should take them to see physical stuff, And I think John Gatto was talking about the education in America. He was saying his idea of good education is a series of apprenticeships. It's sort of in that category, getting you in touch, like physically touching. Like we'd go to the museum and you couldn't touch the sculpture. I'm like, what the heck is that? I mean, like, you know what I mean? You need to touch the sculpture.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there are plenty on the street where you can touch, but you know what I mean? In most towns where they haven't destroyed them willfully right now. But, getting back to our point, there's really a serious point there, thing to that. Oh, the sheer volume.
Yeah.
One of the things I've felt in myself is a sense that it's all been done. And there's no such thing, because you haven't done yours yet. So like which snowflake has been done, as they say,
Yeah.
And so we don't know how to measure this stuff. So we go with love and calling, and we have to do something. All this stuff is there and can inform us on so many levels. But even at that, that's what gives you the opportunity to study the very nature of your form, because there's so many examples. Even though there are only that much of the form, it's not the actual physical craft. It's the visual aspect of it, which is hugely what it is. But it's also a work, what do you call it, an object, the object of art, so between the frame and other things.
Yeah.
Somebody actually wants to define painting as something that goes in a frame. It goes into a nice frame. Anyway, I think it was an important painter who said that. It might have been Degas. Funny. It's funny to hear that conversation. But yeah, no, but there's several traps in that, in seeing so much. But there are good ways to use it all. But there's no reason to go hungry anymore. When it comes to us as painters, we can see it. But there is a kind of a thinking you have something that you don't, which you're making a point about.
Yeah.
You haven't seen the actual work. You don't know what a painting is, an object. Sometimes on board panels, sometimes on canvases, and sometimes in stone on walls, the fresco. But yeah.
Yeah, that last comment you just made, just, thinking about the nature of this form, there's a part of me that wants to just like think about it and spit out the answer. But I realize it's a
mystery of life. You don't really want that.
Yeah, you just have to, enjoy sitting with it and always, turning it.
Yeah. No, I think people do that with marriage and everything. They just got this very superficial, formulaic handling. And then they're in the middle of something and they think, what the heck is happening to me? And I'm mad. And they try to formulate another one. And instead of having come to terms with it, I'm just thinking of marriage because my son's about to get married. Sorry, Mr. Producer, was I not supposed to say that? You can cut me. but yeah, but it's not. That's one of those reasons actually to wait a little bit. But what is the very nature of this thing? But what is it? What is it? What is it? Watch out for your fantasies. I mean, it may be a source of some kind of security or pleasure or something else in all these different ways. But stay tuned to what the heck is this thing that you're in, because the answer isn't just a picture of, a couple and some kids hanging around. The classic picture of little stick figures. It's but it's in the case of art form as well, though. Don't come to conclusions too quickly. You still have to make paintings, and you still have to assert yourself as if you believe something. That's with the beliefs you have. But you always have to be open to what it's becoming as your awareness increases. One of the reasons I teach, Sean, one of the reasons I even want to keep teaching is because the expression of these ideas forces you to rethink everything, continuously rethink and think it through again. Because this is a whole pursuit, even in a conversation, and you've run into this, I'm sure, is about maintaining your integrity. You don't want to say things you can't do, as a teacher of painting. But you also are then forced into the situation of saying, oh, now that I know this, now that I've thought that through and saying this differently, all sorts of things are doing this crazy adjusting and behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it really happens to you. And it happens, and all it is hugely constructed. I think it just brings us to the sheer awesomeness of our existence. To put it in some crazy, if you want to call it that, philosophical frame.
It certainly keeps. It's engaging and exciting. It never, it goes on, and
it doesn't matter what field you're in. You're in painting.
Yeah.
Well, live there. You're gonna understand the world in that world. Obviously, you're always thinking about everything in life. But if you're going deep, what deep is. You start wondering about other things in a different way from what you used to.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you.
Yeah, thank you
for being here today and taking out a bunch of your time. And now you have to run off and make an honest living and make a few pictures. So
yeah,
we'll see you. We'll see you next time. Let me thank you this way.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
And we'll keep trying to do this with people that are around me, other students, if they want to be in the room.
Yeah.
If you have, those kinds of questions or anything that, for me, I have to make a decision about whether I think there's a conversation there. And what I thought there was with yours is an unpacking possibility, the possibility of extending it to something more than you were simply asking. But I wouldn't make that for all you guys who are out there, or my students who are listening to this, that are around me. It doesn't matter how perfect your question is. What matters is whether or not you're engaged in the game, because it will lead us where we need to go. And I don't mean just me and my brilliance or some odd thing like that.
Yeah,
which I'm not a believer in anyway, but as you know.
But yeah, you mentioned that about. I stated that question, and it's like that's the limit of what I'm thinking, but it's something bigger than that.
Yeah, it's often just that much off the mark because your position in relation to these questions is inexperienced.
Yeah,
and tentative even might be a word, or fragmentary. I like that word. It's fragmentary. There's more to come. When you know more, it will come together in a different way.
Yeah.
But all the more reason to get this early start on what's the nature of this form, and go from there. All right.
Great.
Good, Sean.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. See you next time, guys. Oh, and I don't have anyone on this one to thank. I'm really thrilled if you send some more donations and all that sort of stuff to keep us up. But you've been doing nicely lately. I really appreciate it. And but keep on commenting, keep on liking, sharing, and all those things. It's much appreciated. So get people to subscribe, or subscribe yourself. I do hope to do more. These two videos have been are in talkie form. Good for you guys driving in cars, but not for the people who love using their eyes. But I do mean to get more fully into stuff that, where I get the 6,000 hits, which is everything to do with that is, everything that does that, it has to do with the craft itself and showing you things practical. So I do mean to do more. I'm aware of that for you. Anyway, take care. Have a great painting week, and we'll see you next time.